Well, as you can see, I start almost all engravings approximately the same way. I put a little white watercolor on the metal and I sketch out a design, typically in a hard pencil. So you see me here in real time laying out a symmetrical, really simple, fairly typical scroll for me. Um, and I'm doing it on both sides so I can approximate a mirror image. I mean, there's all sorts of techniques that you can use to transfer designs and get perfect mirror images or near perfect. But sometimes for simple designs, I just like to rush in and just draw the thing um, because about, I don't know, more than half of engraving is being able to draw. You can transfer designs, and I often will transfer designs, but when I do that, I'll usually draw something on my iPad or find a copyright-free design and do a laser print of it on paper. And then if you cut it out, you can treat the metal with damar varnish. And once it gets a little sticky, you can put the paper upside down and let it stick a little bit to the damar varnish and then coat it with acetone. And the toner, the plastic-based toner, will move on to the metal and transfer a design that way. But most of the things that I do with fairly straightforward drawing, like we're doing here. So I know that this isn't going to be particularly exciting. I didn't add any music or anything to this just because this is a quick and dirty set of images here. Okay, then I start cutting the design. Um, I can cut the design a number of different ways, but I like to start with the major scroll backbones, as they're called. Um, that helps me anchor everything else. And I am often a little bit off in my drawing, and I find it easier to correct just a few degrees here and there by cutting and turning. You develop a pretty good sense of proportion when you're coordinating your feet, your both hands and your eyes under the microscope, and it can go pretty easily. So you see me here cutting these backbone scrolls, and in just a moment I'll probably speed it up just to get past it. But you can see that in real time, it's not a rapid process by any long shot. Now on this particular design, I'm not going to remove the background, but I am going to stipple it. A little bit. So by stippling, you add just a little texture. It'll wear down over time, so it's not the preferred thing to do really for a robust design. But use a carbide tip and stipple all of the negative space areas. Then, of course, there's cutting the shading lines, which is one of the really fun parts. This is where you decide how to give the design volume. I apologize, I don't have a microscope camera, so this is just my movie camera trying to do a little bit of a close-up, which goes a little bit out of focus. So I apologize for that, but this is about the best I can do. I'll show you some pictures of what the lines look like afterwards. It's all done by hand and by eye. Even though I use a pneumatic engraver, what that does is take some of the effort out of it in terms of pushing the graver through the metal. It's still 100% skill-based and human-controlled, so it's still a hand engraving. So these are some in-process pictures just to show a little closer up. You can see the right side has the shade lines in it, and that's a little closer view of that final design. Then I went on to do a small signet ring, and the first thing I do here is I cut some lines for borders already, and I'm going to add a millgrain edge. So a millgrain are those fine beads that you see, and there's a little bit of a trick to doing that. And what I do is take a wheel, a carbide wheel that has the beads on it, and beat it into a piece of metal, and that provides the background of these beads around the edge. Okay, then as before, I'm going to draw the design by hand, and it'll be, again, just a simple scroll on this one. I think these are really nice signets because they're thick enough that, although I decided to engrave on this one, you could probably flush set a faceted stone, maybe up to a 5mm. You can certainly add a cabochon with a bezel, and that would be a fun thing to do. I'll probably do all of the above. And of course, as I'm doing right here, I'm doing engraving. You could probably also add any kind of embellishment or a die-pressed design. But here I'm just drawing a simple scroll again. So once again, I'll be cutting the design, and the first thing I do, as I almost always do it this way, is to lay in those backbones for the scrolls. Now in this simple little one, there's really only one major one. I did add one minor scroll backbone up toward the top there, which I will cut. But typically the small design doesn't have a lot of room for detail because although you can see it well in this blown up version, when we're actually wearing it in real life, you're not going to be able to see most of the fine design. So I add just enough in so that by eye, it looks really, really nice. Um, but with this kind of a tiny ring, you don't really need to do too much in terms of detail. I could do much finer work, but it would kind of be lost on anyone that wasn't viewing it through the microscope. Well, the focus went way out and I had no control over it. I'm recutting. After I removed the background and I stippled this, which I didn't catch on film. And what I'm doing is I'm recutting the entire design to make the edges sharper. Because what happens is you inevitably glitch and stipple up, goober up the edges of the cuts. And to make it look pretty, I like to recut almost all the time whenever I do a background removal because I tend to screw up the sidewalls and it makes it look much more professional. And finally, of course, I'll do the shading on this as well. And I've got the same problem here that I had on the previous ring design, which is both a little out of focus and it's just hard. The magnification on the zoom feature on the camera is not as good as if I had a microscope camera hooked up to a Trinoc or something on this. But you get the idea. Every single shade line is individually cut and placed I don't do any cross hatching on this particular ring because, as I mentioned, the design is so small that it wouldn't make sense to do too much detail. So this is pretty much a sequence of shots just highlighting what was done to create this signet ring. You can see the design laid out in the background stippled and the sidewalls recut. That's pretty straightforward. And then finally I've put in the shade lines.